Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Coming up, China and Britain pledged to deepen cooperation as London's top diplomat made a China trip. Hong Kong is looking for closer ties with Central Asia as Zhang tours the region. EU trade lawmakers vote in favor of compromise on trade deal with Trump. Claudia Sheinbaum tells U.S. envoy to stay away from her country Mexico's internal politics after drug trade post. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. First up, Chinese Vice President Han Zheng has called on China and Britain to uphold true multilateralism, push forward global governance reform, and enhance global stability and certainty. He made remarks in a meeting with UK Foreign Secretary Yvette in Beijing. Cooper said that the two countries share broad common interests and potential for cooperation in trade and investment, AI, green development, and climate action. In a separate meeting with his British counterpart, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang called on China and Britain to further communicate and align their positions. Cooper has paid a 3-day visit to China. It followed British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's high-profile trip to Beijing in January. So for more, joining us now on the line is Dr. Mike Bastian, Senior Lecturer at the University of Southampton. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Mike Bastian. During Cooper's visit, China and Britain pledged to enhance high-level exchanges and deepen cooperation amid a turbulent global landscape. Are there signs that the two sides are developing a long-term strategic partnership?
I think there are. I think this is more than just a visit. Obviously, it's a very high-profile visit, very senior members of both governments. It follows very, very quickly on the footsteps of the UK Prime Minister's trip earlier this year, which seemed very, very successful as well. So it's a resumption of very, very determined long-term strategic partnership. And as I said, the Prime Minister's trip laid foundations well, and this is building on this. So I think this is very, very good news. It may not seem as though much detail is coming out yet, but you do need this. You need this bedrock of real commitment and public display, which is very positive.
Cooper has called for deepening bilateral cooperation in areas such as artificial intelligence, finance, energy, green development, and climate change. Why do you think it is important for Britain to try to cooperate with China in these areas?
Well, I think there are several reasons. First and foremost, these are the forward-looking industries. These are the industries of the future, particularly artificial intelligence and green energy, as we all know, and climate change. And so I think that's a key reason. But also, I think it's a recognition that China has really taken the lead, and China's economic modernization, particularly in the last few years, and the ambitious plans that the Chinese government have for modernization, particularly with high technology and artificial intelligence, are a key feature of the UK's need to follow on and learn from that. So I think that this is very much a visit from Yvette Cooper and the British government to say, how have you done it, and how are you progressing, and how can we learn from you? So forward-looking industries where China is really taking the lead and others are looking to learn.
The two sides have also discussed the issues including the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the war in Ukraine, and the Ebola outbreak in Africa. So when it comes to global governance, do you see a point where the interests of China and Britain align? As we have heard from the Chinese officials, China is calling for, China and Britain jointly pushing forward the reform of the global governance.
I think so. I think this is also very, very encouraging. Let's not forget that both sides are permanent members of the UN Security Council. So this is very, very good news, which is some sort of rock of stability. And I think their views will align because They're both committed to free trade, multilateralism, and really positive economic development and trade and cooperation. And therefore, there has to be some mutual agreement. The detail may not be quite the same, but yes, I do think both sides can find alignment, and that's really what's come out of this visit and the UK Prime Minister's visit. Most definitely, yeah, it's good for both sides.
When it comes to the war in Ukraine, for example, what do you make of the meaning for Beijing and London to conduct dialogue or communication or just to have a talk?
Well, I think that's the most important thing. There's a resumption in talks, and there's a commitment to long-term partnership and working together, and that really perhaps wasn't there before. Now that's back on the table, and there's real commitment. You keep those channels open, and with open channels, dialogue should create a positive way forward. I think that there may be disagreement, but I think everybody's agreed that we need to find some sort of resolution, some sort of compromise that favors both sides and as much as possible, and then leads back to some sort of normal when it comes to international economics, international trade and finance. I think that's the guiding light, that it's in everyone's interest to find a solution here, and the two sides, the UK and Chinese government, are now firmly back around the table and committed to do that. So this is a really positive start.
It's interesting to note here that the Chinese foreign minister has expressed a particular hope to Cooper, his British counterparts, that Britain could somehow provide a fair, just, and non-discriminatory business environment for Chinese firms. Recently, there have been a few cases that I think deserve our attention. In March, Britain blocked a $2 billion plan by a Chinese renewable energy company to build the country's largest wind turbine manufacturing facility, citing national security concerns. And then in May, the British government suggested that it could nationalize the Chinese-owned steel manufacturer British Steel after London ceased its operational control last year. So first of all, Mike, how would you look at these two recent cases?
They're interesting cases, and you have to look at, I think, the wider picture here. And obviously, we look at, what we say, we're across the pond, and the US, and we have a government and a president who is very different, very protectionist, pressurizing so-called sort of countries and companies with a special interest. So I think that had something to do with these decisions. So I think the Americans and Trump in particular. So I think when you look at that, you put that into the equation, it looks a little bit more positive, because that's not going to go on for much longer. I think hopefully that, protectionism and Trump are on the way out, and we'll see a very different administration soon. I think it's all about a little bit fear of the unknown. I think the UK government have acted a little bit rashly. Personally, I think they perhaps feel that it's a little bit too much too soon. The nationalisation of British Steel is something that they've talked about for many, many years. It needs to be a firm part of Labour's policy in order to help the British people. I doubt very much whether they will actually put that into practice, and probably some part nationalisation. But again, with these talks resuming, that's the most important thing. The channels are open. I'm sure we can find some compromise. So rather than block totally, look at a way of finding a compromise where both parties can win, because Chinese investment in the UK is very welcome generally, and is very good for the UK economy. So I think going forward now with these very high level visits, we will see a much more positive relationship and some very healthy, perhaps, compromise.
Well, I guess it's important to remind our listeners here that when British Steel was in fiscal or financial trouble in terms of its profit or revenue 5 or 6 years ago, it was the money and capital from the Chinese investor, a Hebei-based steel manufacturer, that bailed it out, right?
Absolutely, and that can only be a good thing. And obviously, that was very welcome at the time. And had that not happened, who knows what the consequences could have been. So I do feel that that's a very strong case there, and there needs to be some recognition and also some reward and acknowledgement that Chinese investment in the UK is an opportunity. It's not a threat at all. It's an opportunity for the further development, modernization of British industry.
Hmm. So over the longer term, Mike, are you optimistic that Chinese businesses will be and it can be treated fairly in Britain?
I think so. Again, these talks are very, very positive. I think we need to highlight, and perhaps on the China side, highlight more, as you just said, that the Hebei-based company bailed out British Steel, highlight the real positive impact that this investment has. It really is a stimulus for growth. And if you reverse that, perhaps draw attention to the impact of foreign direct investment in China, going back to the open door policy and the special economic zones. Look at the catalytic, very positive catalytic impact that had on the Chinese economy, and we're now seeing Chinese companies benefit from foreign investment. So I think if you look at that bigger picture and look at the detail, and that's publicized, yes, because everybody benefits. It's a win-win. It's an opportunity for both sides really working together. So yes, I am optimistic. Yeah, and I think we have a very positive current government who look at it that way as well.
Hmm. Actually, during her trip, the British Foreign Secretary also made a visit to the southern Chinese tech hub of Shenzhen for a science and tech program. What is your reading of this part of her schedule?
But I think that's just to focus and to emphasize the focus is on high technology and to go back to where it all started, going back to the sort of the late 70s, early 80s, and Deng Xiaoping's 1992 visit to South China and declaring this real open door and a very multilateral trade policy, and Shenzhen being the focal point of the start and it being very much high technology led. So I think Yvette Cooper is really saying, yes, this is where it's at. And we want to learn from this. So I think she's really going there to say, yeah, how have you done it? And yeah, can we learn from you and work with you? So Shenzhen, high technology, artificial intelligence, green energy as well, it is really the driving force here. And that's just really re-emphasizing that with this trip specifically to Shenzhen.
Hmm. Over the past decade or so, Mike, I think it is fair to say that we have witnessed twists and turns in China-UK ties. What lessons do you think should be learned? And recently, we understand Prime Minister Keir Starmer has faced some domestic political backlashes
Yes.
against him. How could Britain's domestic politics affect its China policy?
Well, yeah, I'll come to that. Coming back to the first question, which is a very, very good question, well, both are. What lessons should be learned? I think the key lesson, this is easy to state, is keep channels open, keep regular dialogue at high level. So, prime ministers, foreign secretaries, maybe chancellors as well, going to high level positions in the Chinese government. Keep those channels open. Once they close, it can be a long way back. So I think that's the key lesson, and there will probably be twists and turns with different governments. I think the good news when it comes to UK-China relations is that despite Keir Starmer's perhaps pressure from his own party, the Labour Party are not obliged to call a general election for, I think it's August 2029. They'll probably call it before then. But the party has a majority of 166. One of his rivals, Andy Burnham, may become an MP soon and may challenge, and there may be a leadership challenge. But the point I'm making is I think the policy and then the attitude towards long-term strategic partnership with China won't change. Whoever, if Keir Starmer is replaced, and I'm not so sure that he will be, but if he is, the replacement will have the same policy and the same attitude for certainly years to come. So we will have a Labour government for several more years, and they will be very positive, very proactive in building long-term partnership with China. So the personnel may change, but the actual policy and the attitude is here for at least a good few years. Yeah.
Hmm. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Mike Bastian, Senior Lecturer at the University of Southampton in the UK. Coming up, Hong Kong looks for closer ties with Central Asia as Zhang Li tours the region. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Liang, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Hong Kong Chief Executive Zhang Li is now leading a large delegation on a tour to Central Asia. The 70-member delegation includes 40 business leaders. Zhang Li says he hopes to deepen cooperation between Hong Kong and Central Asia in trade and investment promotion, financial information and technology services, as well as culture and tourism. Hong Kong's economic ties with Central Asia have seen faster growth in recent years. Total merchandise trade reached over $320 million last year, an increase of 27% from the level in 2020. So for more, joining us now on the line is Sultan Ali, a China observer and retired Air Force officer in Pakistan. So thank you very much for joining us today, Sultan. First of all, what do you think is prompting Hong Kong to seek closer ties with Central Asia?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. And I can see that you have a very interesting topic today. And I would like to respond this way, that in my opinion, Hong Kong is motivated by both strategic and economic imperatives. As Chinese mainland deepens its Belt and Road footprint, Hong Kong seeks to align itself with Beijing's outreach to Central Asia. And the region, you see, it offers untapped markets, abundant resources, and a pivotal geographic position linking East Asia to Europe. So, for Hong Kong, engaging Central Asia is a way to diversify beyond traditional partners, reinforce its role as a global financial hub, and demonstrate its own relevance under the one country, two systems framework.
Hong Kong is promoting or positioning itself as a financial and a business gateway to the Chinese mainland and Southeast Asia as well. From the Central Asian countries' perspective, how does Hong Kong's role as a superconnector sound?
Well, for Central Asia, Hong Kong's super connector role is actually very appealing because it provides access to international capital, advanced financial services, and a trusted legal framework. And Hong Kong can bridge the Central Asian enterprises with a global investor while simultaneously offering a gateway into the Chinese mainland and Southeast Asia. And this dual connectivity, global as well as regional, it makes Hong Kong an attractive partner for Central Asian states seeking to internationalize their economies.
We know a key industry in Central Asia in general is mining and, mining for strategic natural resources. In this particular sector, what kind of linkage can be established between Central Asia and Hong Kong?
Well, again, I think you've raised an interesting aspect of this particular discussion because, you see, please remember, Central Asia's mining sector, which is rich in rare earths, which is energy and strategic minerals, they require investment, technology, and transparent financial channels. And in this case, Hong Kong can facilitate joint ventures, provide financing through its capital markets, and ensure compliance with international standards. Moreover, I believe Hong Kong's expertise in logistics and commodity trading can help the Central Asian resources reach a global market more efficiently, creating a mutually beneficial linkage.
So, as you mentioned earlier, Sultan, Central Asia is really seen by the Central Chinese government as a key partner in terms of seeking cooperation and collaboration under the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI. And definitely, I think John Lee's visit this time is a clear signal that Hong Kong is actively getting involved in the BRI. By adopting such a policy gesture on the part of the Hong Kong government, what do you think this special administrative region can gain in return?
I fully agree with you, because I look at it this way, that John Lee's visit, it signals Hong Kong's intent to embed itself more deeply into the Belt and Road Initiative, because it can see the benefits which will accrue from it. And while the BRI has traditionally been associated with mainland projects, Hong Kong is positioning itself as the financial and innovation arm of the same initiative. And thus, by engaging Central Asia, Hong Kong demonstrates that it is not a passive observer, but it is an active participant. And it is leveraging its strengths in finance, technology, and professional services to support the BRI connectivity.
In recent years, Singapore has also approached the Central Asian countries, positioning itself also as a gateway to Southeast Asia. So, Sultan, in the future, do you see an element of competition between Hong Kong and Singapore when it comes to how to engage with Central Asia?
Well, I'm glad you asked me this question, because coincidentally, I was recently visiting Singapore. I must admit that competition is inevitable. It has to be there. But I look at it as a healthy competition, because you see, both Hong Kong and Singapore, they are global financial centers with ambitions to serve as gateways for emerging regions. And Singapore has already cultivated ties with Central Asia, emphasizing its Southeast Asian linkages. Hong Kong, however, it brings the advantage of a direct integration with mainland's national strategy and the Belt and Road Initiative. And the competition is likely to be constructive, pushing both the cities to innovate and offer better services. For Central Asia, this rivalry could translate into greater options and stronger partnerships.
So, in a bigger picture sense, if we talk about helping establish more linkages, more connections between Central Asia and Southeast Asia, what do you make of some of the untapped potentials right now?
Well, I look at it this way, that you see, the canvas is very broad, and there is no end to a greater, diversification of the partnership. And when you talk about this kind of a strong partnership, then you're looking at a win-win strategy, which something which President Xi has been propagating, so that you see the neighbors as well as the region, they can benefit from each other. And I can actually see it accruing from this kind of a partnership, which will be bringing prosperity not only to mainland, to Hong Kong, to Singapore, but also to the region as a whole.
Finally, could you provide a Pakistani perspective when you look at how Hong Kong and Central Asia are seeking to, align with each other, or are seeking closer economic ties? Do you see potentials for closer ties between your own country and Hong Kong as well?
Definitely. You see, Pakistan is also geographically, it is positioned in a very strategic location. We are very close to Central Asia, while our ties with China, they are the finest that can exist between two countries. And Hong Kong, being a part of the one country, two systems, offers us a partnership which will develop, again, linking Central Asia, Pakistan, and Hong Kong. And this is something which we look forward to and which we are actually aspiring for. So I personally think this will bring prosperity not only to Central Asia, but also to Pakistan, and definitely to Hong Kong. And overall, China will be a winner.
Thank you very much, Sultan Ali, joining us from Pakistan. You're listening to World Today. We'll be back. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A European Parliament committee has voted to scrap EU import duties on a range of U.S. goods despite unease over Washington's approach to trade. The tariff cuts are intended to comply with a U.S.-EU trade deal reached in July last year. Under this agreement, the EU would eliminate import duties on American industrial goods and grant preferential market access to U.S. agricultural and seafood products, while accepting a 15% U.S. tariff on most EU goods. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to impose higher tariffs if the EU misses a July 4th deadline to approve this deal. The legislation is widely expected to be approved by the fuller European Parliament later this month. For more, my colleague Xu Yawen spoke with Liang, Director of Communication and Research with the China Chamber of Commerce to the European Union.
The European Parliament's Trade Committee has voted to back the removal of tariffs on a range of U.S. goods, with 31 in favor, 6 against, and 3 abstentions. What were the main reasons behind this strong support, and why did most lawmakers believe now was the right time to move forward with the deal?
Thank you for having me. I think the vote yesterday was quite a landmark vote, and it was ultimately a vote for predictability rather than enthusiasm. Many EU lawmakers do not see the EU-US trade deal as perfect, and some openly said that it is imbalanced. But the result of the vote shows most INTA members concluded that economic certainty is preferable to another trade confrontation. The deal still has to go through the plenary soon, but let's see how it will go. About the main reasons behind the strong votes among the INTA, I think firstly, the businesses on both sides urgently want stability, particularly in sectors that are already facing weak growth. And second, many lawmakers feel that after the political agreement was reached last year, prolonging uncertainty served little purpose. And third, timing also matters, with President Trump openly warning of higher tariffs if the deal stalled. So many believe now is the pragmatic moment to move forward.
Well, you just mentioned this deal between US and EU was reached nearly a year ago in Scotland, but its ratification by the EU was repeatedly postponed. Why has it taken so long to get to this stage?
Well, the delay reflects both politics and trust issues, I believe. On paper, the EU ratification is always quite complicated, because the Parliament, member states, and the Commission all need to align. But of course, behind the EU-US trade deal, the bigger issue probably was about political hesitation. And many lawmakers question whether Washington will fully respect the agreement, in particular after repeated tariff threats over the past year. Some also resisted the idea of Europe appearing to negotiate under pressure. But finally, Parliament pushed for strong safeguards before giving approval. So that definitely took quite some time. So the delay was not simply about bureaucracy. I think it reflected a broader debate, very complicated debate about how Europe should manage an increasingly unpredictable transatlantic trade relationship.
Actually, some EU lawmakers have insisted on stronger safeguards in case the US fails to live up to its commitments. Then what measures have been taken, and how effective do you think they will be in practice?
Well, this is really the good question, and this became one of the Parliament's key concerns. And lawmakers wanted guarantees in case the United States later changes course. So the deal includes mechanisms allowing the EU to suspend part of the agreement if the commitments were not respected. And there's also a review element with the framework expected to expire in 2029 unless renewed. You ask whether these protections will work. I mean, to some extent, yes, they strengthen Europe's leverage and reassure skeptical lawmakers. But safeguards, they are reactive, not preventive. So if the tariffs return unexpectedly, businesses could still face disruption before Europe responds. So they reduce risk largely, but probably they can't remove the uncertainty entirely.
President Trump has warned that higher tariffs could be imposed if the EU does not finalize the agreement by July 4th. Then how much influence did that deadline have on the committee's decision to move forward?
That was quite an interesting dynamic, and officially that European lawmakers would say that a decision was not made under pressure, but realistically the deadlines clearly to many observers that accelerated the momentum. Businesses wanted a certainty, and many policymakers wanted to avoid another tariff escalation. And even the EU lawmakers skeptical of the deal understood that further delay will increase tensions and economic uncertainty. So I would say that the deadline was probably not the most decisive factor, but it was certainly an important accelerator.
Looking ahead, what impact do you expect this agreement to have on long-term EU-US trade relations, especially given the uncertainty surrounding future US trade policy and tariffs?
I mean, to many observers, the vote and the deal that has quite an imminent impact. In the very short term, the agreement will bring the stability and reduce the risk of tariff conflicts. But you ask the long-term impact. I mean, in the long run, the bigger issue is still about trust. And the challenge in the EU-US trade is not just about the tariffs itself, it's uncertainty over the future policy changes and policy developments. So to many observers, that the agreement is more about a stabilization tool rather than a permanent solution. It could buy time and reduce friction, but Europe probably will likely continue diversifying the trade partnerships and preparing for the future unpredictability in the U.S. trade policy.
Then do you believe this deal will truly prevent a return to the transatlantic trade disputes?
I think the deal is of great significance for stabilizing the trade relations or frictions. But as I said, it's not ultimately a solution. Is definitely many people are quite realistic about the reality. The reality is that probably the U.S. administration is sometimes not as predictable as many expected, or there will come some unexpected measures. You never know. That is why they put a very strong safeguards measures. They put a lot of clauses in the deal for the EU version. I think they are prepared for something, but as I said, it is of great significance. But to many, the deal itself, you should not pin the final hope on it. You should always preparing for something.
Liang, Director of Communication and Research with China Chamber of Commerce at the European Union, speaking with my colleague Xu Yawen. This is World Today. We'll be back.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum is urging Washington to keep out of her country's domestic affairs as tensions grow over anti-drug cooperation. Her remarks came after a social media post by the U.S. ambassador appeared to accuse Mexico of politicizing the fight against the drug trafficking. Since the year 2024, Mexico has stepped up cooperation with the United States, extraditing more than 90 suspects. However, ties have become strained since April this year when U.S. intelligence agents participated in a raid in northern part of the country without prior authorization from the federal Mexican government. And amid concerns about foreign interference, Claudia Sheinbaum's administration has since passed a constitutional amendment allowing the election results to be invalidated if foreign meddling is found. For more, my colleague Song Ruixing earlier spoke with Dr. Cao Ting, Director of Center for Latin American Studies with Fudan University.
Professor Cao, Mexican President Sheinbaum told U.S. Ambassador Ron Johnson that diplomats must respect Mexico's internal affairs. How significant is it for a Mexican president to publicly challenge a U.S. ambassador in this way?
Well, I think this means that the tensions between the U.S. and Mexico have escalated recently. Although Mexico is a neighbor of the U.S. and maintains close ties with it on trade, economic, and security issues, this does not mean that Mexico has completely forfeited its diplomatic autonomy. The Mexican president's statement or expression represents the autonomy and nationalism of the Mexico government. And Sheinbaum has inherited López Obrador's nationalism approach and is actively striving to secure greater strategic autonomy within the traditional U.S.-Mexico relationship.
And this doesn't appear to be an isolated incident, actually. This dispute comes amid broader tensions over drug trafficking, U.S. intelligence activities, and the indictment of a sitting Mexican governor. Taken together, what do these developments tell us about the current state of U.S.-Mexico relations?
Well, between the U.S. and Mexico, there exists both cooperation and conflict on security issues, and this conflict has intensified recently. The Trump administration has consistently threatened and pressured certain Latin American countries, including Mexico, under the pretext of combating drug trafficking. And Trump has declared on multiple occasions that if Mexico fails to dismantle drug cartels, the U.S. will unilaterally take military action to achieve this objective. So under the U.S. pressure, in this February, Mexican armed forces killed the leader of a major drug cartel, and it triggered riots in some regions across Mexico. Nevertheless, U.S. has continued to apply pressure by indicating 10 Mexican officials on drug trafficking charges, provoking strong dissatisfaction from the Mexican government. And this indicates that tensions between Mexico and the U.S. have intensified due to Mexican interference.
Right. Concerns about sovereignty have become a recurring theme in President Sheinbaum's response. Mexican president recently signed legislation allowing election results to be challenged on the grounds of foreign interference. And supporters describe it as a necessary safeguard for national sovereignty, while I've seen critics worry it could be used for a political purpose. How do you view this move?
As we see, the purpose of the Mexico's current constitutional amendment is clear. Last year, the Trump administration openly interfered in the midterm elections in Argentina and the general election in Honduras. And in recent years, Trump has also designated several Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations, and it aims to use this as a pretext to attempt military deployment and law enforcement operations in Mexico. And on the economic front, Trump has frequently applied pressure to constrain Mexico's development. So faced with U.S. interference, the Mexican government aims to uphold its sovereignty and autonomy. This is precisely the core driver behind Mexico's swift push for the constitutional amendment.
That brings us to the case that has recently intensified tensions even further. The recent U.S. indictment of a member of Sheinbaum's Morena party has further heightened tensions between the two countries. And then in response, Sheinbaum suggested that the move may be driven in part by U.S. domestic politics. How credible do you find that argument?
Well, I think the President Sheinbaum's argument is credible and politically salient, especially given the timing before U.S. middle-term election and her assertion that the U.S. has not provided clear evidence. However, I think it is not the only credible interpretation. The U.S. Department of Justice has presented detailed indictment with specific allegations that include electoral interference, bribery, and facilitating the trafficking of drugs. Both of the political and the judicial explanations may contain elements of the truth, and the coming moments will be critical in determining which narrative holds more weight.
Okay, then let's step back from this specific case for a moment. Despite these disputes, both countries remain deeply interconnected on trade, migration, and security, like you've said before. How much of this tension is structural and how much is simply political theater?
Well, currently, Mexico is under pressure from the U.S. in multiple areas. On the economic and trade front, USMCA negotiations launched this year will see the U.S. pressure on Mexico over issues such as the rules of origin, telecommunications, networks, energy and minerals, and investment by Chinese companies in Mexico, etc. And the U.S. is Mexico's largest export destination and source of investment. So Mexico is unable to break free from its dependence on the U.S., but is unable to tolerate the pressure from the U.S. Meanwhile, on security issues, Mexico continues to face pressure related to counter-narcotics efforts and the issue of the illegal immigrants. The current tensions are a result of the structural relationship between the two countries, compounded by increased pressure from the U.S., which is also tied to the U.S. domestic politics. Trump seeks to gain support from American public by taking a hard line against Mexico on security issues.
Which naturally raises the question of where the relationship goes from here. Looking ahead, do you expect these agreements to remain manageable, or are we witnessing a more fundamental shift in the tone and direction of U.S.-Mexico relations?
I think it is impossible for U.S.-Mexico relations to change fundamentally in the short term. Although Sheinbaum has made critical remarks toward the U.S., Mexico remains heavily dependent on the U.S. economically and trade-wise, needing to secure American markets and investment to sustain its national economic development. The current Mexican government's expressions of defending national autonomy are more of a rhetorical appeal to the U.S., a way to bring the U.S. to the negotiating table. Therefore, Mexico is likely to continue strengthening its cooperative dialogue with the U.S. on economic, trade, and security issues, and it will not be able to completely break free from the U.S. influence. However, through this issue, we may also see that Mexico has, to a certain extent, asserted its national autonomy in its stance towards the U.S.
That was Dr. Cao Ting joining us from Fudan University, talking with my colleague Song Ruixing. You're listening to World Today. I'm Ding Hen in Beijing. A new generation of young founders is reshaping China's tech industry. From DeepSeek's Liang Wenfeng to Unitree Robotics founder Wang Xingxing and AgiBot's Peng Zhihui, a growing number of young entrepreneurs are becoming central figures in China's next generation of tech innovation. What is really driving this new generation of innovators, and how could they reshape the global tech landscape? My colleague Zhao Yang spoke with Dr. Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics from Peking University.
So, Li Lun, first of all, what makes this new generation of Chinese tech founders different from the internet entrepreneurs of the previous decade, do you think?
Yeah, so I think this earlier generation or entrepreneurs of the previous decade, they oftentimes built their companies on platforms on the digital infrastructures like digital payments, e-commerce, food delivery, consumer services. And this new generation, I think, is more focused on these so-called hard technology. For example, robotics, chips, AI models, embodied intelligence, advanced manufacturing, and I think the key difference is also in their business cycle, because when we see these consumer internet companies, they can scale up and expand very quickly if they can capture enough internet users. But these AI and robotic companies, they do require longer development cycles. More investment in R&D, more time in hardware testing, in supply chains coordination, and also they need to hire a lot of engineers. So I think today's founders are entering these sectors that require longer research cycles and also are recruiting engineering heavy teams. And finally, I think the ambition between the two is also different. So they're not, for example, we have seen in the consumer internet entrepreneurs, sometimes they're adapting a foreign business model into the Chinese market. But right now, a lot of the entrepreneurs are trying to build these core capabilities that are also, in the frontier of the global development. So I do think, it's not just that the founders are younger and in the new generation. I think the key business model and also the focus has shifted.
And why are so many young entrepreneurs now focusing on AI, robotics, semiconductors, and advanced manufacturing? Are we seeing a shift in China's innovation model from fast followers to builders of foundational technologies?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is that the consumer internet space is very mature, because China has already have a lot of giant platforms in e-commerce, in food delivery, in short video, in social media. So for these young founders, it's very hard to find the big opportunity in these areas. But I do think the big opportunity right now is, for example, in AI, robotics, in semiconductors. It also aligns better with China's current economic priorities, which is in terms of industrial upgrading and also promoting the productivity growth. And I think there's very strong evidence that China's, in terms of its innovation base, it's also deepening. So in terms of China's R&D investment, the figure in 2024 has already reached 3.6 trillion yuan, which is a 9% growth year on year. And also in terms of enterprises, so the private enterprises are accounting for 70% of national R&D expenditure. And in AI specifically, China is already leading. So according to a report by the World Intellectual Property Organization, the China-based inventors are producing more than 38,000 generative AI inventions. So it's the 6 times of the US figure. So we're seeing a shift from these followers to building, as you said, building of foundational technologies. The transition is not even. It's still depending on the breakthroughs in chips and softwares. But I do think we're seeing development in the right direction.
And many of these founders are engineers first and businessmen second. So how is that changing the company culture and innovation priorities?
So I think the difference between engineer-led companies and so-called businessman-led companies is that the prior tends to focus more on product performance, on the efficiency in the technical level, and also in the long-term competitiveness instead of the short-term marketing strategies. There are also, for example, could be less polished or less focusing in branding and marketing, but in terms of solving these hard technical problems, they can be more disciplined and also more determined. I think there are a bunch of examples. For example, in DeepSeek, it gets a lot of attention because of its open source models. It also delivered competitive performance if you compare with ChatGPT. And also Unitree is also another example. It has become internationally known for its quadruped robots, but its humanoid robots is also gaining a lot of attention, and it's aiming to ship 10,000 to 20,000 humanoid robots globally in 2026. And finally, another example is this founder called Peng Zhihui, who founded AgiBot. So he is very well known. He's almost like an internet celebrity because he posted a lot of videos on Bilibili or other social media platforms. And also he did a lot of experimental hardware projects online. He later worked at Huawei and then co-founded this a company called AgiBot, which is focusing on the humanoid robot and embodied intelligence. So we could see, for example, a lot of these founders are genuinely interested in the company and in the technology that they're working in. So I think this culture, this is shifting from, I'm trying to do marketing, I'm trying to, attract more users, to actually building in the long term and solve technical bottlenecks and actually improve the productivity.
And China is producing more and more young engineers entering frontier industries. So what role are universities, research labs, and tech ecosystems playing in this trend?
Yeah, so universities, they provide, the broad talent base. So the engineers and also, for people who graduating from the STEM majors, they give the startups easy access to the talent pool, to the engineers who can, start working on AI, on chips, robotics, and so on and so forth. But I do think, other research labs or even companies, they're also very useful in terms of providing the training ground, providing the applications for these talents. So, for example, Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, or ByteDance and others, they're directly exposing these young engineers into the large-scale systems, into these, for example, the startups, the new inventions, the chip design, hardware to software integration. And Huawei is also very important because it has a lot of experience in telecom, in chips, operating systems, and so on and so forth. So as a young engineer, you have the exposure to all of these knowledge at the application level, and you could use them as a good testing ground for your new invention and quickly gain your experience. So as I mentioned, the AgiBot's co-founder Peng Zhihui is a good example of how these large companies can incubate these future founders and also train them into entrepreneurs in the future.
And what does this new generation of founders reveal about where China's economy is heading next?
Yeah, I think it's an impressive story that in maybe 20 or 30 years' time, China's comparative advantage is no longer about low-cost labor, or in terms of, because we have such a large population, having a consumer internet company is going to attract a big market. Now it's more about we are the leader in terms of automation, AI adoption, and advanced manufacturing. We could use this technology to actually improve our productivity. The rise of AI and robotics, and also the rise of these very young founders, are also a reflective of how China, for example, in the future, as the workforce ages, as the labor costs rise, automation is going to be not just the technology, but also a necessity for our development of the macroeconomic future. So I think the industry is moving forward into we can call it the upgrading of the industrial base, because AI and these softwares, these chips are applied to factories, logistics, healthcare, and so on and so forth. So the global competitiveness may be vastly increasing from this integration. And also, I think there's also going to be newer and newer generations of entrepreneurs also entering this very exciting time. They're also going to contribute to the R&D and also creating technologies that's going to redefine how we design our products, how we use our products, and how do we develop the future for our economy.
Dr. Li Lun from Peking University speaking with my colleague Zhao Yang. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Ding Han in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.